This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform for all of your website building needs. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today we're going to be talking about commissions. Again, I know I've already covered this topic multiple times in a variety of different ways. I talked about why you might not be getting commissions and how to market them to avoid that. I talked about commission scams, and I talked about commission pricing. That last one is the most relevant here though, because it's why I didn't expect to be making this video. In that one, linked in the iCard above and the description, I already discussed why commission pricing is such a contentious and polarizing issue within the art community, as it's quite evenly divided between people who believe artists should be charging more because they deserve a living wage, and undercharging also devalues art as a whole in the market, and people who believe that artists should be free to undercharge since for some of them, that's the only way they're going to get any commissions at all, given how competitive and oversaturated that market is. Previously, I argued that, in my opinion, both sides are right, but both sides are also wrong to suggest that theirs is the only right side to be on. Artists do deserve to be paid a living wage, and it's not wrong to suggest that they charge what their art and time are really worth. But artists also deserve the right to undercharge for their work if charging fairly means they can't compete with the droves of other artists undercharging too. And while that may indeed contribute to the devaluation of art by telling customers that that undercharged price is what that art is actually worth, it's not really fair to blame individual artists for that when they're just trying to do what they have to get by. I end that section of the video by essentially saying that whatever option you choose, charging fairly or charging competitively, should be solely up to you, your priorities, your financial situation, your preferences, and your needs, and that no one has the right to tell you that what you're charging is objectively wrong. And since I do still stand by that stance, I never thought I'd be here making a video about why artists should be charging more, like I am right now. But I am, because I feel like especially with the cost of living crisis and deteriorating economy right now, that video needs a follow-up discussing when charging more for your work is no longer a matter of preference, but necessity. Because there is, for many artists, a point you get to where your personal views on undercharging or fairly charging are no longer a luxury that you can afford to consider, and charging more is, for all intents and purposes, one of your only options. And there are a few times in an artist's life that they'll be in that position, and many are in it right now, so I want to discuss it and how to handle it today. But first, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace, a longtime partner of the channel, and, in my opinion, the best website building and hosting platform out there. I've been working with them for a long time. A long enough time, in fact, that it's become a running joke that a lot of you guys comment your concern for my well-being when a video doesn't start with a Squarespace segment. But I've been using their platform for even longer than that by far to create and host my personal Duchess Celestia portfolio site, which I built with a template that doesn't just let me display my work, but even lets me organize it into categories. That template immediately sold me on Squarespace even before I got to see all of the other amazing features it offers, but it's far from the only one. Their library of templates is so extensive and versatile that no matter what kind of site you want to build, they'll have the perfect one for you. From portfolios like mine to fully functioning online stores, blogs to engage with your community, landing pages for your small business, and so much more, Squarespace has a template that can bring your vision for it to life. And once you find the right one for you, it's easier than ever to edit it and tailor it to meet your needs exactly using Fluid Engine, their next generation editing system that allows you to customize every part of your site with smooth drag and drop ease. And like I said, fully functioning online stores are just as easy to build because Squarespace offers e-commerce and print-on-demand integration. And not only that, while those tools let you sell everything from digital goods to physical merch, their payment options make things just as easy for your customers, letting them pay with anything from credit cards to Apple Pay and PayPal, and in eligible countries, even long-term payment options like Afterpay and ClearPay. And all of that is just the beginning, with SEO options designed to get your site to reach as many people as possible, visual design tools that help you establish brand recognition, social media account connectivity, and so much more. They have every tool you could possibly need to make web design easy and fun. And you can find out yourself by going to squarespace.com/DuchessCelestia, linked in the description, and use code DuchessCelestia for 10% off your first domain purchase. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and please go check them out. Now, let's talk about commissions. I know the intro might have rubbed some of you the wrong way. After all, I said no one can tell you the right way to price your commissions, and then directly followed it with, you need to charge more for your commissions. And I don't blame you if it did. I understand that it might seem contradictory when my previous video openly called people out for telling artists that they need to or even should charge more, as if they can objectively decide what's right for them. That's why I want to clarify right off the bat that that's not what I'm trying to do. In that video, I explained that the vast majority of people who criticize artists for undercharging do so because not only do they want them to be paid fairly, they also don't want the market to suffer as a result of that mass undercharging. To simplify the concept in the same way I did in that other video, if 5 artists are selling commissions that should, if priced fairly, all be worth $100, and 4 of them are only charging $25, it doesn't matter that the work of all 5 is worth $100. Because the first 4 are charging $25, if the 5th one tries to charge the full $100 it's worth, they're liable to lose business to the other 4 that have now convinced customers that a commission of that type and quality is only worth a quarter of that. And that is true. Undercharging does contribute contribute to the devaluation of art, because the more you lower your prices to compete with the rates of other artists, the more customers view all work of your caliber as being worth less and less until they're only willing to pay the lowest possible price, since as far as they're concerned, that's what's fair. That's what you're telling them is fair. But because so many artists are in a position where that is literally their only option if they want to get any commissions at all because everyone else is doing it too, I don't think it's fair to blame them for contributing to that, since there are few other options available to them. And subsequently, I don't think it's fair to tell them they need to be charging more on the basis that their failure to do so is hurting their fellow artists as much as it's hurting them. That's not their intention. Most want to be paid a living wage, and very few have any desire to negatively impact the finances of their peers. But not undercharging is simply a luxury they can't afford. Of course, I think that in an ideal world, we should all raise our prices at once in a grand gesture of simultaneous revolt and solidarity, which would allow us to restore value to art and subsequently get paid reasonably to make it, since everyone else is too. But realistically speaking, I don't think that's going to happen, simply on the basis that it's what we deserve anyway, because we have no assurance that other artists will follow suit, and we won't be left losing all of our customers to the artists that didn't raise their prices when we did. And in that way, nothing has changed. I still don't believe it's right to tell artists that they need to charge more for any of those reasons. Whether they deserve better pay or not, it's up to them and them alone to decide if they'd rather sacrifice that to compete with the market. And whether that market is devalued as a result of their undercharging or not, I don't think it's right to blame them for that consequence when their alternatives are few and far between. But there is an instance in which an artist does objectively need to raise their prices that has nothing to do with either reason. And that's what I want to discuss today, since it's becoming more and more unavoidable and globally experienced as the current state of the economy continues to deteriorate. I'm not an economist. I've done a lot of research and read a lot of studies and articles on the current state of affairs around the world when it comes to the rising cost of living, but I am by no means an expert, and a lot of them are pretty contradictory, so it's hard to draw any objective conclusions based on them. Some say things are getting better or will soon. Some say the cost of living is continuing to rise to a potentially disastrous extent. I can't comment one way or another with any degree of certainty on which side is right, since not only have I found a lot of conflicting data, a lot of it depends heavily on both the country and the period of time that our current time period is being compared to. What I can say is that according to Statista, inflation was fairly steady throughout the 2010s, and along with all of the other disastrous consequences of the pandemic came a change to that steadiness. And while the global inflation rate did fall during the first year, 2021 brought it up quite a bit. Since then, as food, energy, and housing costs have continued to rise, that statistic has now risen even more by 2023, which is the highest it's been, apparently, since 1996. That's a simultaneously long-winded and oversimplified way of saying that it's getting more expensive to live faster than our wages are rising, at least for the most part. But for artists, those financial waters are even muddier and harder to assess, because those of us that work as freelancers aren't paid minimum wage. We aren't salaried, we aren't paid by the hour, we are paid the rates that we set, and it's up to us to decide how those rates should change to accommodate economic changes. The problem is that since there's no universally agreed upon value of art or commissions, setting rates based on market prices is difficult if not impossible, and there's no authority or power in place to make sure that people have to pay us more in accordance with the rising cost of living. So their willingness to do so is dependent almost entirely on the rates that we're forced to set without any concrete data to consult. No one will fight for our right to be paid even an astonishingly low minimum wage. Minimum wage for us is whatever the majority of artists are charging for their commissions, and a lot of them don't realize that what they charge needs to rise over time to accommodate the economy, so they aren't raising their prices, which means our minimum wage isn't rising, almost at all. And again, to be clear, I'm not saying artists are obligated to charge more because what they charge determines our minimum wage. Yes, each individual artist does contribute to that base rate by charging what they do, but their choice to undercharge is not one that I feel they should be blamed, shamed, or criticized for when it is, for many, their only option if everyone else is too. My argument is instead that the degree to which we're collectively undercharging is reaching a point where it's no longer financially sustainable for anyone, and that's why it needs to rise. As it stands, artists as a general rule are pricing their commissions based on standards that were set before the massive spike in inflation and cost of living that we're facing now. Charging $20 for a headshot commission that takes a couple hours to complete was still well below minimum wage before, but it was acceptably below minimum wage for many artists when $20 was enough to cover their entire cost of living that day. With smart spending and good financial management, I was able to spend $20 or usually less a day back in 2019. So even if minimum wage dictated that something that took me 2 hours to make should have been $30, I was okay with pricing it more competitively at $20, since $20 was enough to pay for that day's meals, and competitive pricing meant getting more commissions. So if I did 4 a day and spent 2 hours on each one, the $80 I would make from it would have been worth the time spent making it. It was sustainable even if it wasn't necessarily fair pay. But things have changed. Today, the salad I just had for dinner alone, which to be clear was literally just lettuce and a couple small pieces of chicken with no dressing or add-ons because I brought it home to add the cheaper dressing I already had there, was $15. Yesterday, I was able to buy a pack of lozenges, a loaf of bread, and a small package of cheese for $30. $30 would have been more than I spent in an entire day in 2019 buying and eating much more than I do now. And now it's barely enough to cover rudimentary costs and basic needs. And that means that if I took those same 4 commissions a day at $20 each and made $80 for working 8 hours, while that would previously have been quadruple my daily expenses, it's now maybe half. If I need to go anywhere that day, travel expenses will mean it's even more than half. Sometimes all, since medical tests and procedures frequently require me to go to the other end of the city and back. Now, that doesn't sound so bad, right? Oh no, poor baby is only making double her daily living costs rather than quadruple. Cry more. Well, that's based on the assumption that the remaining $60 from the total $80 made in that day was going straight to savings or indulgent purchases. And it wasn't. It was going towards rent and bills, which, if factored into my daily living costs, would have raised those living costs to about $45 a day. So back then, making $80 a day would only leave me with $35. Still not bad, but I also wasn't getting 4 commissions a day by any means, so that wasn't what I was actually able to save. Even so, in an ideal world where I was getting 4 commissions a day at $80 for 8 hours of cumulative work on them in 2019, that still would have left me with $35 a day. That's not the case now. On a good day, I spend $25 on food and $15 on travel. Base living cost of $40 out of that total $80 that I would make in an ideal circumstance with the maximum number of commissions that I can complete within that time period. Then factor in the combined cost of rent and bills, and I'm paying another $70 a day at least. So if I were charging rates that were sustainable for me in 2019 and even left me with extra income on a good day, I would now be spending money much faster than I'd be making it. It now costs me $110 a day to survive, and charging $80 for a day's worth of work is not only no longer enough, it's gonna leave me unable to afford food or a home. It's always been incredibly difficult for artists to price their work, in no small part because the widespread view of art as a frivolous luxury or unnecessary hobby has long since contributed to the unwillingness of the general public to pay what it's really worth. After all, they don't view it as being worth that much. Well, you may make a very valid argument that Doritos are overpriced. The bottom line is that wherever you live, the price stores charge for them will be largely the same since there's an established market price for them based on a multitude of factors, including how much it costs to produce and how much people are willing to pay for them. While some places, like Walmart, may price them a few cents cheaper to entice customers that would have otherwise shopped elsewhere, and other places will price them a few cents higher to capitalize on the fact that they're the only place in the neighborhood that sells them and customers have no alternatives, the average relative cost of Doritos will remain the same across the board and rise and fall as inflation does. Art's value, however, has no consistent and easily determined value. Not referring to the fine art market, of course, that's its own can of worms. What a commission, though, is worth is not, in many cases, based on any kind of assessment of how much it's worth on a technical level, but rather what people are willing to pay for it. And what people are willing to pay for it has always been relatively low, due to the societal devaluation of it as both a form of expression and a valuable good or service. It doesn't rise when inflation does, like the price of Doritos. If anything, as inflation rises, people have less money to spend on art, so the value they place upon it actually lowers. The more expensive it is to produce Doritos and pay employees to do so, the more expensive Doritos become in turn. But the more expensive it is for artists to live and produce art, the less they're paid for it, because Doritos and literally everything else is so much more expensive for everyone that they can't afford it anymore. And if its value is largely determined by how much customers are willing to pay for it, that means that art's value lowers when we need it to rise. I don't know why I'm so hyper-focused on Doritos, I'm sorry. I just bought Doritos and the fact that they were $7 is still living rent-free in my head. Anyway, because of this, for a long time, artists have been in a position where, even though we all know that undercharging only makes people willing to pay less for our art in the long run, we also know that undercharging is the only way to sell it at all when those rates are all people are willing to pay. But we've gotten to a point where we're charging the rates that we set before the world effectively went to shit, so to speak. And while that largely still reflects what people are willing to pay for it, it's no longer enough for many of us to survive on. And if we keep charging prices that were appropriate in previous economic conditions but aren't now, and keep telling customers that those prices are still appropriate by doing so, we're sacrificing both the quality of our work as we try to churn out twice as much of it for the same price to get by, and our financial stability as we fail to. And this is the only instance in which I think it's objectively appropriate to say that we as artists do need to start charging more, even if we don't stop undercharging altogether. Regardless of how you feel about artists who undercharge and their impact on the market, it's a necessity for many of us that's simply unavoidable, and I'm not denouncing it or recommending against it by any means. But I think we're approaching a point where we have no alternative but to raise the baseline by which we do so. If charging $20 for a headshot commission when minimum wage said it should have been $30 is no longer sustainable, then we should revise our rates to reflect that without eliminating undercharging from the equation if we don't want to. We should reevaluate what we should be charging and find a new appropriate amount to undercharge. In a province with a reasonable minimum wage that's been adjusted for inflation, that headshot would now be worth $35 if it took me 2 hours. 8 hours of work at that minimum wage would be $140 $40 a day, which would meet my $110 a day living costs and leave me with $30 to spare. But if I undercharged and priced each commission at $30 instead of $35, I would still be making $120 a day, still leaving me with an extra $10 that could be saved to compensate for a day when I didn't sell as many commissions. We can still undercharge to be competitive if we want to, but we need to do so in a way that's still sustainable enough for us to live on. I feel like a lot of artists feel like the only justifiable reason to raise their commission prices is that their art has improved enough that they feel like it's worth more. And that's precisely why I wanted to make this video, because it's not. Of course, that is a more than justifiable reason to raise your prices, but you don't need to have massively improved to be justified in doing so. And I think that misconception is leaving a lot of artists struggling with the state of the economy right now. I'm not trying to tell you the right way to price your commissions. I stand by my stance that no one can tell you the right way but you, because it's different for everyone. There are some resources in the description to help you figure out how to price yours, by the way, because the specifics of that aren't what I'm talking about here, although I did include some pointers to consider in the previous video linked in the description as well. None of them can tell you what's going to be right for you, nor can anyone that's criticizing you, but they're worth considering when determining it for yourself. But the bottom line is that regardless of how you feel about undercharging or the devaluation of art, there comes a point when it's simply and objectively unsustainable not to raise your prices. When you could work 14 hours a day on commissions alone and still not make enough to get by because you're charging the same rates you set when doing so would let you work 8 hours a day and make more than enough to live on, it is no longer a matter of opinion. You need to raise your prices. And I know that's easier said than done, especially because of a point I already raised, that the higher the cost of living is, the less value people place on art, as it's a luxury and not a necessity. People are willing to pay less, and you need to charge more to survive, something that's made even more difficult by the fact that more and more people are choosing to generate AI images for free now when they would previously have hired an artist to create a piece of art. It's an impossible situation, and there is no right answer that I can give you. All I can give you is the wrong answer, continuing to undercharge so much that you can no longer afford to get by doing the same amount of work that you've always done or more. Prices for everything else rise with inflation. Prices for art need to too, even if those prices are still undercharging to remain competitive and affordable for most customers. And I know what you're gonna say. If I raise my prices, I'll lose customers, and then I'll be worse off. That may be true, but there are 2 points to consider. First, most people currently commissioning you, despite the cost of living, are people with some amount of expendable income. And if they can afford to pay $20 for a headshot, they can probably afford to pay $30. That's obviously a vast overgeneralization and not always the case, but it often has been in my experience and that of many others. Secondly, both options are unsustainable. Saying raising your prices will lose you customers and make it impossible for you to pay your bills is less significant when you consider that not raising your prices will also still leave you unable to pay your bills, since those bills are getting higher and your prices aren't. Neither option is good, but at least one offers you a chance for improvement. Best case scenario, your financial situation becomes significantly more sustainable and secure, and the average value of art gradually begins to rise, at least slightly, in accordance with the cost of living. Worst case scenario, you have to lower your prices back to what they were before to get customers again, and you're back at square one, which is almost as unsustainable as not getting customers at all. And what then? Well, if you can't raise your prices or live on the prices that you can charge, it's an unfortunate reality that something else needs to change. It would be irresponsible of me to suggest that every artist that was making a living solely on undercharged commissions before the cost of living crisis can continue to do so seamlessly and easily now if they're unable to raise prices while maintaining the same number of customers, because it's possible that they can't. The art market has always been volatile and unpredictable, and freelancing with commissions as your primary source of income has always been risky, since it relies on a consistent number of orders a month that you can't actually count on always getting. And now, with things the way they are, with both the economy and the rise of AI image generation, that's even more unreliable. I don't want to be pessimistic. It's entirely possible that the cost of living will go back down soon, and the amount people are willing to pay for art will rise, while the cost that artists have to pay just to get by will lower. But if it continues as it is, I think the only sustainable option for a lot of artists relying on commission income is to raise prices at least high enough to reflect the current state of the economy, rather than the one that we set them during. And while I don't personally think that that would lose you a significant amount of business, I can't promise you that it won't. It might. And I still think you have to take that risk if what you're charging now isn't enough to live on. If it is, that's awesome, and while I would still encourage you to consider inflation and other economical factors in your pricing, if you're able to live on what you're charging now, you don't need to change a thing. But if you can't, I personally believe that you do. There are only so many hours in a day that you can spend working on commissions, and if you're filling all of them and what you're charging in return is no longer paying your bills, what other choice do you have? And if you do lose customers as a result and you're in an even worse financial position, it might be time to reconsider commission work as your primary occupation. I hesitate to recommend that because I never want to tell an artist not to pursue their passion to the fullest extent, but I would also feel irresponsible encouraging people to continue doing something that may be to their own financial detriment. I'm not saying stop stop taking commissions or give up on an art career, but I am saying that if you're not making enough from commissions and you can't raise your prices and still get customers, you might need to consider alternative streams of income, at least until the cost of living returns to some semblance of normal. And there are a lot of options to look into to supplement your income with art. Selling your existing art as merch on dropshipped apparel that doesn't require upfront investments that you might lose if it doesn't sell, selling brushes, stamps, and textures for digital art programs, selling at local markets or conventions, branching into more lucrative commission markets like VTuber models, or even not safe for work if you're comfortable with that, offering exclusive content in exchange for monthly support on sites like Patreon, and so much more. I'll be doing a video soon on ways to make passive income as an artist that will go into more detail, but for now, suffice it to say that the internet has created infinitely more opportunities for artists to monetize their work in addition to commissions that are worth looking into yourself. There are also ways to increase the value of your commissions from a customer's point of view without actually changing much about how you complete or sell them. The reason so many people are less willing to spend money on art when times are tougher economically is that it's a luxury without a purpose beyond looking nice. If you can turn it into something with a purpose in addition to looking nice, you might be able to get that lost interest back. VTuber models are a consistent way to get commission income, since the people ordering those commissions intend to use the final product that you deliver to make money themselves through streaming. So it's a consistent market that remains mostly stable since it's not just art, it also has practical value to those who purchase it. Character sprite commissions for PNG tubers are another similarly consistent way to give practical value to art and entice otherwise uninterested customers as a result. That's also why selling your art on merch is so much more lucrative than selling it as prints, at least in my experience, because it's wearable. It doesn't just go on the wall and look pretty, it clothes the person who wears it and serves the dual purpose of looking nice and making sure they don't get arrested for public indecency. Stickers and keychains are similar, although to a lesser degree since their practical use is still mostly frivolous unless the stickers are for something like bullet journaling or labeling. Things like those $20 or now hopefully $30 headshots can be alternatively marketed as custom social media icons that customers can make individual use of. Fully rendered illustration commissions could be marketed as custom book covers, album covers, and promotional materials for advertising. I got a commission from RBC that way once. Your line art can be sold as coloring sheets or books that customers can relax by interacting with and making their own. Any way you can find to give utilitarian, practical value to your art so that it becomes less of an unnecessary luxury and more of a justifiable purchase, even in difficult financial times, is a way that you should explore if you're currently struggling, because it may mean the difference between sustainable income and, well, not sustainable income. People have lost appreciation for the value of art in many ways, but if you remind them of a use that it could have for them personally, that value can be reestablished, even if only on an individual basis. Ultimately, regardless of specific circumstances or factors, the bottom line I want to get across with this video is that if you're relying on commissions to get by, and what you're currently charging for them is no longer able to pay your bills like it used to, you aren't just justified in raising your prices, you need to. And you don't need to because you deserve it, although you obviously do, or because if you don't, you're personally wronging the entire art community by devaluing commissions for everyone else. You need to because there is no alternative if inflation has left your current financial situation untenable if you don't. The price of everything else raises over time as inflation does. The rates that you charge for your art should too, even if not to the same degree, although I wish it realistically could be. It irks me that this bag of Doritos was allowed to be $7, but I can't up my prices by $7 without potentially losing clients. But I could still up them by 3 or maybe even 5, and while that's not fair in comparison, it's something. If you set your commission prices yesterday, of course, this probably doesn't apply to you. You set them based on the current economy and what you can currently afford. But if you set them years ago and you haven't raised them because you don't think you've improved enough to earn or warrant it, please consider reevaluating them. You're selling your work at a price that was only sustainable in an economic climate that we no longer live in, and you have every right to adjust it based on the one we live in now, even if only slightly. In fact, you may not have a choice. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Zelda Deverak 42, Hierarchy Saluzzo, King Good James, CP Lil Thing, Art of Amethyst Fable, Extinction Animation, and Andy the Hedgehog, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Cora Fear, Jimmy Shawalker, Alengchi, Kim Yen, Crazy Asar, Ken Tong, Grace Snake Xavier, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Celine Merriman, Ash, Aldrichia, The Stray Dog, Allura, Greg Noble, Decagon, Jenny Chan, Catbus, Mac, Lucy Amajiki, Selena Beebe, Friday, Totally Shogun, Insomniac Sleep Schedule, Ling Tang Wong, and Marie Greer, and I'll see you in the next one.